Buenas tardes.
Hi, everybody. So I'm so happy to be here with Luis Alberto, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Goodnight, Irene first, and then we'll have a chat.
Okay.
Okay. So I have spent most of my life preparing to write this book. That's what Luis Alberto Urrea wrote in a letter to readers that opens his latest novel, Goodnight, Irene. If you've never heard of the Club Mobile Corps, an all-women volunteer program of the Red Cross, affectionately referred to as the Donut Dollies, we'll learn all about them in the novel, Goodnight, Irene, and tonight as well. These volunteers, the women, had 2 months of training and then were sent out among the troops in 2-ton trucks equipped with coffee makers and donut machines. And not a little compassion. But they also faced harrowing experiences out there behind the front lines. Through his research, Luis Alberto Urrea discovers that his mother had been on the front lines, she and her truck mates. The Donut Dollies were recognized as the foremost women in battle in World War II and were among 250 elite Club Mobile women who accompanied the troops that pushed through France and Belgium and even Germany after D-Day. Urrea's mother was assigned to Patton's Third Army and became trapped behind enemy lines in the Battle of the Bulge and was there to help liberate Buchenwald. Urrea's mother did not speak about her time in the Red Cross, but the author's research and an incredible twist of fate that leads him to a 94-year-old donut dolly who worked with his mother, helps him retrace the steps and write the story. That story is Goodnight, Irene. It is a work of fiction, but as Urrea writes, sometimes the fable is the surest way to see the truth. And I just have to include this part. There's an epigraph that opens the book. It's from the song lyrics of Irene by Joan Manuel Serrat. He's a beloved Spanish composer and singer whose music is much admired by Mexicans and Mexican Americans. In the song, Serrat sings, "No comprendo cómo puede usted pasar y no verla. No comprendo cómo puede usted pasar y no verla," or I don't understand how you can pass by and not see her. How has a story like this one passed us by? How has it not been told and retold of this compassion, this valor, and this selflessness of someone like Phyllis McLaughlin de Urrea? How did even she hide it away in a diary, in a box, in the secret compartment of a hollow doorknob, or in her own long forgetting? Well, Luis Alberto Urrea helps us see and learn the story. I just want to add this too. Here's what NPR said about your book. I got to do it, Luis.
Okay.
Urrea's newest book, Goodnight, Irene, takes as inspiration his mother's own Red Cross service, with its affecting and uplifting portrait of friendship and valor in harrowing circumstances. Goodnight, Irene powerfully demonstrates yet again that Urrea's gifts as a storyteller are prodigious. Luis Alberto Urrea.
Are we done?
Time's up. Well, Luis.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you about, let's get it out of the way first. Let's talk about that Serrat song.
Sí, Irene.
Irene.
Yeah.
Because I know what you've said to me before about that is that you want to speak to La Raza, because there was this idea that this book's a little bit different from your other books. And you said to me, but I'm still about the raza. Like, this is who you are.
Yeah. Well, you can imagine me. You know my bibliography, and then suddenly I show up with a World War II epic about white ladies. And, you know, it was noticed in New York. They were like, what? Oh. And I realized all these years they've been trying to educate people about the border. Every book, again, well, you know, Luis is very sincere and authentic witness to the border, you know. And I think that was a real blessing. But also, there are things in the book, you know. I already knew, because of all of the old timers in my life, how many Mexicanos went to the war. Lots. And when you read the record, there's always, you know, Pedro Gonzalez is getting a donut, you know. Rigoberto, quien sabe quién, is having a cup of coffee. And so I thought, that's really interesting. And a little bit of trivia. So Zoot Suit, El Vato Loco, in the last half of the book, is from my first novel. Bobo Garcia, este pobre, he's been waiting 30 years to show back up. But there's a moment, and you think, that, you know, that's it. And in the first novel, he has a kind of a PTSD relationship to what happened in Buchenwald. And now we see him, what happened. It made me happy. But, you know, it's my mom. And I didn't ever, I don't think, sign a contract and say, yeah, I'm going to write about raza forever. Rudy Anaya, who was one of my mentors, you know, he wrestled with that stuff too. And I remember when he went off the path and wrote a Chicano in China, and the Chicanos gave him a terrible time, vendido and blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And I can't repeat what he said to me when I said, what do you say to them? But you can imagine what he said. It was a very terse 2-word sentence. No, you have to tell what you have to tell. And to me, it's always been about witness, a representation. And I think, you know, my mom, when you realize that she was a war hero and erased, with all the women completely erased and forgotten. And that really bothered me, you know? And I did know, it wasn't found necessarily through the research to this. I did know, but not much. She wouldn't talk about it. Mm-hmm. And as we all know, a lot of veterans don't tell. They don't talk. And she got more and more isolated and consumed by nightmares at night. And, you know, you see things, you know things. Her legs were all scarred up. And I knew her stomach was slit. And she would say things to me like, you know, I'm in pain every day of my life. Mm. And I didn't realize that it was another pain, not just the physical pain. And I've told, by the way, we were talking back, this is the end of our book tour. Cindy's in the back somewhere, but we've been on tour since May. So this is our 34th state, plus Canada. But so it's wonderful to be here with you, because I love San Antonio. But you know, there was all this stuff, and her nightmares at night were terrible. And I started to understand that there was something wrong, but I didn't know what, and I couldn't make her happy. And she had systematically isolated herself. When she came back from the war, wounded, went back to her home in New York and couldn't stay. Left New York in 1947 and didn't go back. Abandoned all of her family. Went to San Francisco. Stayed there a little while. Left San Francisco. Met my dad. Might have been a bad mistake. Alberto Urrea. Woo. And he swept her off to Tijuana, for God's sake. And so here's this socialite from New York City suddenly in Tijuana, not speaking a word of Spanish. Can you imagine? And then, that led to all the various things. So her friends, the Donut Dollies had kept in touch, but she vanished from then in 1954 and left no forwarding address, no. Weird. So I was in that isolation, and I poked around in her secret belongings and found things I shouldn't have found. And so bit by bit, the story would come out.
How old were you when you knew about the Donut Dollies? Were you a young boy?
Oh, yeah. Well, knowing about them and knowing is different. We have in the book, I don't know if you've seen it, but in the frontispiece of the book, the publisher made a gallery of photographs of my mom. And, basically one of those photographs was always on the wall. So I knew, because there was my mom in some kind of uniform. I didn't know what it was, but Mom.
I see.
Our stupid mistake in life, right? Oh, it's just Mom. And then in fourth grade, I opened up her war trunk and found the pictures of the dead bodies. Oh. So I thought, whoa, something, and it wasn't all grim. She was a laugh riot when she wasn't crazy. ¿Me entiendes? It was like, you didn't know. And my mom was the only American in the family. Puros Mexicanos and my mom, who didn't speak Spanish. And she tried really hard, but she could never get it right.
No.
She'd try to say que la fregada, and she'd always say, oh, que la fregando. And all the Mexicans would laugh. Ay, que feliz,
Luis, you mentioned your wife, Cinderella. I cannot see because of the lights.
She's hiding.
We have to talk about Cinderella.
Okay.
I mean, from what I have surmised, she has been with you every step of the way. And I remember you telling me the story about how she read to you from the diaries. She helped you find Miss Jill. She got behind the computer and Googled how to find Miss Jill, the donut dolly, the 94-year-old. So I just want to acknowledge Cinderella. I just think you all are such an incredible team, a power couple. Where are you,
go,
Cinderella?
Cindy, go. She hates this. She's like...
Sorry, but I just think she's awesome.
Yeah, the thing about my mom's journals, she wrote poems, she wrote all this stuff. She was quite artful, and she was willful, too. She was, I have paintings of hers and drawings of hers. Once we were going through her Foot Locker, and I was looking, and there are all these documents, and she has a certificate signed by Harry S. Truman. And I was like, Cindy, check it out. We got an autograph of Harry S. Truman. I turned it over, and my mom had done cartoons all over it. I was like, Mom. But there were two things that were incredibly painful to me, and one was the calendar that she kept a note every day until there was no more note. I know exactly the day she died. And they were just cries of despair all the time. And there were things in her journals she was quite, and I hate to talk about her as a tragic figure because the book is a laugh riot, in my opinion. Yes. These women are wild. Yes. But so she had this very insouciant thing going on and very witty. Mm-hmm. And so she would tell these wonderful stories. There's a story she had journals and she had loose pages. And there was a wonderful story on a loose page where they were getting ready to go across the English Channel. They were landing on Omaha Beach. And, it was a flotilla of military and commercial boats taking them across. And somehow she and her best friend Jill found the captain, and they took him out drinking the night before, and they were drunk. And it was foggy, and he couldn't remember where his ship was in the fog. And they're holding him up, and they're going from ship to ship, and he's yelling, are you my ship? What ship you looking for, mate? So-and-so. Not us. Damn. And they walked I love stuff like that. It's just hilarious, and told very dryly. But there are portions of those, PTSD is a progressive thing, and it gets more and more vicious. And so in her pain near the end, she was just lashing out everywhere. And when I started seeing that I was, a selfish beast, I couldn't look at it. So Cindy looked at it for me because I just couldn't do it.
Yeah. Well, Luis, so this British accent. I've heard this British accent before in the interview that we did for Book Public, where you and your family you were doing research.
In Glatton.
Yes, in Glatton.
Yes.
Can you tell that story?
Sure.
You said it was like Monty Python.
It was Monty Python, 100%. Our youngest daughter is named Rosario Teresa, named after my godmother and Teresita from the Hummingbird's Daughter. So she's got quite a burden on her. But we call her Chayo because my godmother was Mama Chayo. And so we take her on journeys a lot, all of them. But since the older siblings have aged out of family trips now, they're married and stuff, she gets to go everywhere. And we were going on various trips to research my mom's journey. And it was spectacular. I mean, it was epic. And, we drove their entire route through Germany and ended at Buchenwald. And, and the thing that we hadn't done because COVID happened and interrupted the travels was we had not seen all the places in England she'd been. And so we took her, and London was great and everything was fabulous. And my mom was stationed at this air base called Glatton. It's actually called Conington, but the Brits thought the Americans wouldn't understand it on the radio. So the most nearby town is Glatton. And it sounded like Americans talking. Glatton. And so we went, and there are folks there who care for the Yank air bases. And we were with them, and they go to the bases and they still wash the signs, and they've put monuments there. It's just very touching. And so we went to the village my mother lived in, and I'll show you in the book. There's a picture. And I've got to say, every time I open the book, she's looking at me. But this photograph down here is in Glatton.
Yeah.
And this is my mom doing her movie star.
Yeah, I love it.
But they're
Beautiful.
watching bombers take off. And so we took Chayo. We went to the town of Glatton, and that house that's there is still there. It's a thatch-roofed house built in the 1400s. And there was an upstairs where the women lived, and the downstairs, John Ford's film crew lived there. So they were flying high, and they had bodyguards downstairs, night-long poker games, booze, bar. They were living it up. And so we were looking at it, and I could show my daughter that window is your grandmother's bedroom. She'd never met her grandmother. So she was tripping out. And there's a cobblestone street, and across the street is this house, and it's very old. It's the old kind of English house where the dark wood is on the outside of the white walls, You can see the frame of the house.
Yeah.
It's very, very old on a cobble street. And it was the home of an author named Beverly Nichols. And that's back when dudes were named Beverly. Yeah. And my mother was a fan of his, and she was very literary. So the thought that she lived across the street from Beverly Nichols was amazing, and she'd go hang out there. And so we took Chayo, and our hosts, well, let's get pictures, all right, and we're snapping pictures, posing in front of this house. Unbeknownst to us, the owner is behind us in the kitchen looking out the window like. And I'm sure he was thinking, what are these people? I don't even know who they are, and they're taking pictures of my house, you know? And he came out, and he said, what's going on then? And we said, oh, sorry. My mom lived over there, and she was a donut dolly in the war, and she was the air base. And he said, well, I suppose you should come in then. And that's how this whole thing, it was just unexpected all the time. And all of a sudden, we're in this house, and we go into the literary parlor, and the authors that hung out there signed the wall. And I was like, oh my God. And we went out and looked in his garden. And those things happened over and over again. And the other Monty Python-esque thing is when we went to the air base, Glatten Air Base, it was this fantastic B-17 base. There were many of them. The Yanks came in instant air bases. And the thing I adored, and I told them, this is the most British thing I've ever heard in my life. The air base has the takeoff and landing strips in a big, gigantic triangle, a mile on each side. And there's a triangle of land. And the guys who maintain that airport, a guy named Jeff, Geoff, Jeff. And he said, well, because I said, that's interesting, set up like that. And he said, well, you see, there was a recalcitrant farmer. And I said, a recalcitrant farmer? Yes, he refused to sell land to us, so we had to build around him. And they have pictures of this old bastard, driving his tractor as the planes are taking off. And Jeff was so great. However, they didn't know the women had been there. They were there every day. They saw every flight leave. They stayed up all night waiting for them to come back. They had a rule that they wouldn't let any boy go, possibly to his death, without some affection and a couple of hot, fresh donuts wrapped in a napkin. And they saw them burn to death when the planes crashed. But these guys were flabbergasted, they couldn't believe it. And they were very sweet. And they're called the Fireball Squadron because I guess the pilots like to drink fireballs. Any of you who have an occasional cocktail. And Jeff said, for some reason, to Chayo and me, would you like to walk the landing strip? And we said, yes, and off we go. And it was so cool because when he got away from everybody, he said to us, if you come out here at about 6 a.m., you can hear the engines. And we like ghost stories, of course. Mexican. I was like, yeah, man. And we walked down the field, but it's one of the most touching things of all this. He left the field and he went down and he dug in the dirt and he picked up a triangle of tarmac. It's the original. And he says, you should take this home with you. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, your mom might have stood on it. Right? So that was magical. Comedic and also really touching at the same time.
So I talked to you right before you went off on your book tour in your SUV.
Yes.
And so it's been a while now.
Yeah.
And 34 states and Canada. Mm-hmm. So has anything happened on the book tour that was as magical as that when you were doing your research? I know you've met so many people, some donut dollies or relatives of donut dollies. I wonder. All
the time.
Yeah.
Everywhere. Yeah. Something happened here last night.
Yeah.
It was very touching and private. And I told the person, now I know why I'm here.
Wow.
I came here to meet you.
Wow.
People make you cry all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes just because your butt hurts and you're tired. But yeah, there have been so many events that have been just blessed or magical or weird, And one of the things that's interesting to me is that the trucks themselves are all gone. Yeah. When we left Europe, we just left them. And so they were reconstructed or repurposed or trashed. And there's a Spaniard who's obsessed with donut dollies. Fano Suarez. And he publishes things under what he thinks is a British name, something like a Rodney something. But it's Fano Suarez. And so he started writing to me, and we corresponded, and he sent me a picture of my mom's truck, which, when the picture was taken, is in a field somewhere in Germany, abandoned. And there are people inside it, waving. And I said, "Is that my mom?" And he said, "No, son hippies." Oh, wow. But yeah, you meet people. There are two things that stick out. I know Cindy probably has a million too, but it was so overwhelming. One of them that was super cool is Gettysburg, the battlefield, now has a World War II museum. And if you're interested, I urge you to go check it out because it's astonishing. And if the gentleman that was helping us is named Mike, he's a veteran, Marine veteran, and they've been overwhelmed because people are sending all the stuff because now the veterans are dead or gone and the attics are full of samurai swords and German helmets and so he's receiving all this stuff. And he also has a giant hangar that is full of trucks and army tanks and stuff. And every once in a while, they have some kind of weird festival where you can drive the army tank around. I thought, I'm going back for that. But they had some war buffs. They rebuilt a donut truck.
Really?
It's the only one.
Amazing.
And we went specifically to beg, "Can I get in it?" They're like, "Oh yeah, So I have pictures of myself at those serving windows, and it's the first time in all that time we'd seen the trucks, but not in that configuration. Wow. Gosh, there's stuff like that.
Luis, can you talk about the trucks as you describe them in the novel? Because the women had to drive these trucks, and it's not just a truck, right?
It's a 2.5-ton truck, 6-wheel drive.
Yeah.
Military people know them, 6x, GMC truck. And Dorothy in the novel, based on Jill, it was a farm girl from Indiana who had gone to college, so she had education. But she had driven the tractors, and they had a truck, I think its name was Betsy, which was an old power wagon or something. So she could drive all that. And I'm sure we're going to get to Jill anyway, but Jill's motivation, Jill was a twin, and her brother was named Jack. Who's your humor? And they were like, well, he was born something like 30 seconds before her. So the family's joke was, Jack fell down, broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. And she told us that 47 times, I think. But and he had gone to, certainly after Pearl Harbor, and she knew that she wanted to be there with him. And she told us I was not going to be in the rear. They wanted women in the rear, and I wasn't going to put up with that. And I wanted to find my brother, and so the best thing she could do was join this and drive the damn truck herself, which she did. So that was pretty fascinating. But perhaps one of the magical things that you're thinking about, I don't know, we took our research material with us. Mm-hmm. Because there isn't any. We had about all there was. And audiences, would show up. And we were in Seattle. And I did my thing, and we talked and whatever. And there was a woman who came down out of the audience, and she had an 8x10. And she gave it to us. And look at it. It's a woman in a uniform standing in front of a clubmobile, one of our trucks. Mm-hmm. And we said, what is this? I don't know. It's my mother. She's dead now. It's in the war. And we said, that's a clubmobile. It's one of the things we're talking about. She didn't know. And we said, do you know what group she was in? No. What group? They were in groups. So we got her name, said, we'll get in touch with you. And we were like Batman and Robin, And we went back to the hotel and busted it out, or Cindy did, being the reporter. I'm just baffled, thinking, how cool, we met that woman. And Cindy's like, yeah, I'm looking it up. We found her. We found what group she was in. But here's the thing. And this is when I realized that this book had something more going on than just me wanting a hit book. We found out that her mother's truck was the first vehicle that went through the Arc de Triomphe in the liberation of Paris.
Oh my gosh.
She beat Patton. And then to contact this woman and say, guess what about your mom? You had no idea. That was cool. So you feel a blessing, you know? And then later on, because all the World War II dollies are gone, there's one woman who's still alive. She's about to turn 103. And it's very difficult to talk to her because she's deaf. So she has a phone thing that prints out whatever. Who knows what it says on her end. But everybody else has died. But there are some Korean veterans alive. But the ones that are my new girlfriends are the Vietnam donut dollies. And they are amazing. You know, they're all between 67 and 70 something.
Did you meet them on book tour?
Yes, ma'am. There might be some here, I don't know.
Wow.
We meet them everywhere, and it's interesting because if you can imagine meeting Grace Slick and Janis Joplin, that's what it's like.
Wow.
They were rockers. And we didn't really know, and we were going to Colorado, and there's a whole bunch of them in Colorado, and they had been reading the book, and they came, and they all had sky blue T-shirts that said Vietnam Donut Dolly.
Nice.
And they sat in the front row. And I was like, oh my God, man. And I would talk, and honestly, I would be saying something, and I'd check with them, and they'd all be like, oh no, I hope I got everything right, you know? Anyway, they presented me with a certificate from the Red Cross, and then the most touching thing is they pinned me with a combat service medallion for my mother. And we hang out with them, and they're all interconnected because they do the internet, and they want their stories told. Writers, anybody. I told them I don't think I can do another Donut Dolly book, but it's an amazing other story. They'd come in on helicopters because they couldn't drive trucks in there. It was Apocalypse Now style. And they'd hang out and yell, "Hi, soldiers! Hi, troops!" And they couldn't make donuts, so they each had packets, like care packets.
Wow.
And they'd spend the day, and they'd put on shows and play poker with them and stuff.
One last question before we open it up to Q&A. So the donuts. I like the connection of donuts with your father and with you. Can you tell?
You are
that
evil.
story?
So we didn't really know what the Donut Dollies did, or what she did. So when my mom and dad came from Tijuana and settled in San Diego, his first job, well, he was a busboy, but his first good job was driving a donut truck. And we never knew why she thought it was so damn funny. And he'd go off to work, and she'd always say, "Oh, Alberto, be sure to bring me a glaze." And we thought, "Está loca, mi mamá." You know? And then to make it even worse, my first paying job, donut cook. The same thing, she'd be rolling on the floor. "Oh, this is just fantastic, dear boy." And then you realize, oh, no wonder she thought it was so amusing. She must have thought, this is God messing with me, you know?
Love it. Luis, you're such an amazing storyteller.
Oh.
You should write books.
Oh, I should. That's a
Incredible.
great idea.
I could sit here all night and listen to you. So we'll open it up to Q&A. somebody's-
How many donut dollies were there? Numbers.
Cindy, how many were there? I always think that there were 120, but there were many more.
There's about 500.
Yeah, over the full war. At the time my mom was in there, there were about 120 women, but there were women before and then women after, and then during occupation more, and there was a lot of attrition. And also, my mom was almost killed, and, she was taken out forcibly. Jill met somebody, married him, and then found out that the Red Cross wasn't going to give her her stipends, and she was married, and she was like, the hell with that, I'm going to go get a job in the U.S. again. Because they gave a little monthly stipend, which she was very practical.
I've got a question for you. You mentioned that this other woman brought you a picture and didn't know anything about it. Was this a common thing that you found?
Oh, yeah.
Did you find an instance when a woman didn't, or when someone knew that their mother did this and knew the stories? Or were they pretty much all quiet about it?
They were all quiet about it. And the amazing thing, we get letters almost every day that would break your heart in a million pieces, all the time. And family members, who didn't know, had no idea, or grandpa would maybe mention that there was a young girl that gave us donuts one time. That was heartrending to us. But yeah, we got confessions, and we get mail from people sometimes. This guy wrote, and he didn't know his mother had killed herself when he was a little boy, and he knew that she was in the war, and he thought she was in the donut dollies. And so we tried to help him, but we started thinking, it sounds like she might have been some kind of secret agent, man. She's something really incredible. We don't know.
Wow.
But yeah, turned into a ministry. We didn't know it was.
Wait, and there's something sinister almost that these women just were shutting this down.
Gone.
Yeah. Thank you.
Partially, it wasn't entirely a conspiracy of silence, but they were just expected to get back home and go back to work and do their thing. But also the records building burned down. So all the Red Cross records of that era burned. And they disappeared. These women just literally disappeared. And they took care of each other. They formed communities. So there's a book that's impossible to find. We only know of 2 copies of it. We've got one, and a young woman who did her PhD on them has the other. And it's called the Donut Truck Ark in the Storm for ARC, American Red Cross. And we think we can't find her, she's long gone, but it seems that she was in a retirement community and started hearing these stories, and then just obsessively found all the women. And it's invaluable because it's got every truck who was on it. It's got stories that my mom, I found out what she did Christmas Eve during the siege of Bastogne in her own words, which I'd never heard. And there's a picture of her delivering mail in Belgium somewhere to people. So it's an amazing little book, but if you can find it. I tell people always, if you're interested in it, I always, just take a look in places, where you can get old stuff, on the internet. ¿Qué más?
Can I just shout this out? Do you have the recipe for the donuts?
Oh,
The recipe for the donuts.
it's drastically awful. Because you've got to imagine, they're under fire, they're driving around chasing Patton everywhere. And so the Red Cross just it was all mixed. And they would deliver it in these giant sacks. And I can't imagine, like, the guys in the Red Ball Express. Could you go, please take donut mix to the gals driving into, and it was water and this mix. And it was proscribed. It was exactly the same every time. But one of their first instructions when they were training was to weigh the water.
Yeah.
Weigh the water, because that's the secret ingredients. And they called them sinkers, which should tell you how good the donuts were, because you put them in the coffee, they're gone. But I think it was the symbolic value of it, and also that they had record players in the
Yeah.
trucks, so that they would play records for the boys too. So it was just like a club on wheels, literally a club mobile. But yeah, we don't have the actual recipe with us, though we do have it somewhere. It says what went in it, and it had all the stuff jumbled up.
So Luis se supone that we assume this is the last stop on your book tour.
This is it.
This is it? Broche de oro, right?
Yeah, right? Yeah. And what a great place to finish. San Anto, come on. Yeah. So it's been a long...
On your next book?
Of course.
Do you want to do you want to say anything about it?
Oy, pues it's back to Tijuana, baby.
Yes.
You know, come on now. Yeah, it's called the Zebras of Tijuana. And if you know Tijuana at all, you know our beloved zonkies, the burros painted like zebras. But people don't know anything about the history of Tijuana. And then I thought, well, I could say whatever I want to. I could make up a history. But everybody has pictures of them, you know, in the cart with the poor zonky all like, and you know, they have teams now called Los Zonkies de Tijuana and all that stuff. But you know, they surged in the 30s when Caesar's Cafe invented the Caesar salad. I always tell people, man, you don't like Mexicans? You're eating Mexican food with that steak, dog, you know? Caesar salad made by Caesar in Tijuana. And they had the High Life Fronton and the Bull Ring, and some genius entrepreneur of Tijuana decided, what if I painted my donkey? Put white stripes on my donkey. Hijo, eres un genio. And so that's how it happened. It's been happening ever since, the painted donkeys. So I thought, well, how can you make a picaresque story out of this? Because I tend to do two really heavy books. So it was House of Broken Angels and then Irene. And I thought, I'm emotionally.
Yeah.
So let's have a crazy book.
Great.
And so it's about a kid who his dad doesn't like what he's becoming in Chicago. And he takes him to Tijuana, you know, to get in touch with your Mexican side.
Yeah.
And it doesn't go as dad planned. And the kid accidentally finds a real zebra. And it's about the misadventures of trying to get this, you know, they call it el burro cabrón, because it's really mean. And they have a relationship, him and this zebra. So I'm just having a great time thinking of it. I've written some of the opening. I think it's going to be fun. I'm bringing back from Into the Beautiful North, Atómico. Atómico is his tío.
Yeah.
Can you imagine this poor kid
Yes.
from Chicago with Atómico? If you haven't read the book, it's Tijuana's only samurai.
Hi.
Hi there. Nice to meet you. When I started dating my husband, I thought it was a deal breaker when he confessed that he doesn't read so much. And I expressed that probably in my facial expression. And shortly after, he brought me one of his favorite books, which is The Devil's Highway.
Oh.
And I'm curious from your perspective, because I do believe that authors and artists have a role to play in any democracy, how you would talk about, or what your recent thoughts are, more latest thoughts about what's happening in America right now.
Oh, you know. Yeah. Oh, boy. Yeah. I can just tell you that if you're going to drive through the United States for 4 months, keep your windows up, because we went through places that were really harsh and angry, and it was kind of weird. And, you know, Cindy likes to go places where there are big dudes with red hats and guns. And, you know, Hillary, or one that had a really rude thing on the back about the Border Patrol. And I was like, oh, stop putting these T-shirts on, man. You know, and people then look at me, and I keep saying, you know, they're gonna beat me up. It's very hard. It's very hard, and I don't know what exactly to do. I still write about it. There's a piece coming out in National Geographic, which to me was just a delightful story about migration and people. And there's a photographer who's been sort of this family calls him the terrorist with a camera, because he's been with this undocumented family for decades, taking pictures of everything. They don't even see him. And so he took me to their home, and it's the classic story. They came from deep Mexico, undocumented, made their way across the border, made their way to Chicago, to Pilsen, had little apartments, and it was just a classic evolution. You know, they made elote wagons, the miracle little wagon with elotes, and the guy walks through yelling, elotes, elotes calientes, right? And he goes around the corner and he comes back, nieve, paletas. I always thought, what happened? I've always loved that. And now they have moved to the suburbs of Chicago, and they have a gardening company, and their girls got DACA, and they're in college, but they're living on indigenous land that the settlers moved into, and now the settlers don't know what to do with the raza that's there. It was so moving to me. We had a great time. And National Geographic is losing its mind with worry about this article. I'm not sure if they'll publish it. It was my happiest article. And I talked to the editors a couple of weeks ago, and I said, this is so radical to suggest that the people that cut your lawn are human beings with dreams and families they love and a beautiful house. What's wrong with you guys? But they were afraid. They're really afraid. So to see National Geographic is afraid says a lot. Five minutes. Okay, lightning round.
One more donut question?
Yeah.
Yeah, so where did and I don't know whether on this trip you were able to visit the original donut shop on Fredericksburg Road. It's a donut shop and taqueria. It's a combination taqueria donut shop. But how did the idea of the donut shop, of the donut dollies come about? Were the donuts given only to soldiers? Looking forward to reading the book about this, but were they for the soldiers, or did they spread the donut Eucharist, among others, non-military?
Yeah, it was specifically for the soldiers, but dock workers would come by and they would make them coffee or tea, and it was I think it was kind of a communion. If you think about it.
Fryers in the truck?
Yeah.
And the coffee urns and the Victrola and the records.
Yeah, in the back, the record player was on hinges, and they'd pull it down, and they had loudspeakers, and they'd play 78s, all the hits. And yeah, there was an electric donut machine that would crank out. They could make 30,000 donuts in a day if they had to. It was insane. And they saved the old ones too.
Yeah.
Which probably they needed to dunk in the coffee by then. But yeah, it was definitely for the servicemen who were under duress. But they also, they attended to them in so many ways. Each truck had they had ledgers, and you could look up your friend and see if they were okay where they were, and leave messages for each other. So I should have brought one, but we brought ledgers in our truck. So everywhere we went, people wrote, which was really cool. It became a kind of a communion, and we often took donuts. We didn't have to, because every bookstore, we got donuts. We're like, oh boy, I don't know about this. But yeah, it was mostly for the boys, but they made them available. And you know, just briefly, I know we're out of time, but when they got to Weimar, and they had been traveling, you know, with Patton and seeing him from a distance or interacting a little bit with him, and they had made an actual what they called a donut dugout in Weimar, and they didn't know what was up on the mountain. And Patton came. And it was a club, classic, not in the truck club like they used to do. And when Patton came, apparently the GIs ran for their lives, trying to get away from him. And he came in, and he was apparently very friendly with the donut dollies. And they were, oh my God, it's Patton, you know. And he said to them, ladies, I'm gonna need your help tomorrow. We're going up the mountain and we're gonna liberate a prison camp. And they thought it was a POW camp. They thought they were gonna go save fighter pilots or B-17 pilots. And he said, just come up, no donuts, basically. So they were like, well, that's weird. They had no idea. And the irony, which is a horrible irony, they stayed up all night and made ham sandwiches for Buchenwald. I think it broke them in so many ways. They'd never seen anything like it. And my mom, the thing I did that started all of this really was open her war trunk and find the Buchenwald pictures, 4th grade. Then it was the first serious conversation we had about this stuff. I've never forgotten it. And she said, I had my camera. I took those pictures until I became ashamed of myself for taking those pictures. And she said, ever since the war, I'm ashamed of myself. I didn't take more.
Did Patton really apologize to them for taking them there, for having them there?
He was aware of what the effect was. He was very kind to them. I was at a lunch today and I told this little bit, but my mother dragged me to see the Patton movie. It made me sit through it 3 times. 9 hours of Patton. And this, don't worry, we'll stop. But on the way home on the bus, and she used to call me dear boy. And she said, or Lucci, dear. Little Lucci. And she said, Lucci, dear, Georgie Patton was a very naughty boy. I don't know what she meant. I was just like, Mom? So I always told myself, yeah, he was a prankster. But I think he may have been a flirt with the donut doll. Very naughty boy.
Luis, I want to read this. And
Okay.
And I know we're running out of time. I dedicate this book to my mother, Phyllis de Urrea, 1916 to 1990. She was known in the Second World War as Phyllis McLaughlin. She served with Jill Pitts Knappenberger and Helen Anderson, crew of the ARC Clubmobile Cheyenne, traveling the roads and locations visited in this novel. Rest in peace, heroes. Thank you, Luis.